Okay, so I'm redoing a video because I realized I broke a couple of the rules I was discussing in a video. My day-to-day conversation, I use a lot of cuss words, especially with kind of the military, ex-military, roughneck type audience that I've been after on a lot of stuff. And then I got to remember this SF major guy is a pastor these days. Okay. So anyway, I wanted to address this because he's kind of a guru in some survivalist circle stuff, and we apparently have some mutual acquaintances. There was a video posted about, what about the sick, what about the poor, what about the unwell, or whatever in SHTF type situations. Now, what that stands for without using swear words. Okay, anyway, so let's say things start going sour. Let's say things are, the economy's down, disasters happen, there's conflict going on. If you're in a conflict zone and you're a combatant faction in a combat zone, there's one way to behave. But I'm going to make this from the standpoint that you're probably not a combatant in a combatant faction during some sort of a serious revolutionary type thing, because those priorities are going to work differently, and a special forces major should know better. Okay, so I'm going to say that, let's say things get a little medieval, and you've got wealthier survivor prepper types, and they don't have manpower, and to run these hobby farm things and these survival retreat places, you got to figure out real quick you need manpower. Okay, you need productive people and you need manpower. And for everybody who seems to think that they're just going to have all the stuff and the stuff runs itself and the stuff works alone, no, it doesn't work that way. Okay, that was plantations. Plantations falling apart after the Civil War. Okay. And one of the ways a lot of the northern farms survived during the Civil War was they had these interesting little things, and you'll see these in a lot of the border states. You'd see them in Kentucky, Tennessee, that kind of a thing. The little statue thing where it's a little jockey type thing, and he's holding up a lantern. And what those were actually signposts in the Underground Railroad. And there was a code to how the little black jockey thing is holding up a lantern by how he's dressed, and sometimes by the color of lantern that he's holding up, what kind of goods and services are going to be available at a place for runaway slaves. And so the deal was that there were these other farms and plantations and horse farms and other types of things on the border of the slave states. They had a little jockey thing, and they would show how the jockey was dressed, what color it was, and different things. There was a code to this on what goods and services were available to escaped slaves. Now, the most common way this was done was the slaves performed farm labor, and they worked their way north as they did this. They would work, because when they escaped from a plantation, they usually didn't escape with much in hand, okay, just a little survival stuff, and they get out of there. And they go and they find these other farms and plantations in the north where slavery is illegal and there is some level of resistance to the slave catchers. And you'd see these little plantation jockeys, and a lot of them would mean that you could hole up for the night. You could hide out there. You could hide out in their little worker quarters. Sometimes these plantation jockeys were in southern located plantations where the white plantation owners were sympathetic to the slaves and were helping slaves of other plantation owners escape. Well, here's where this worked out, okay? They would convince the slaves of the escaped slaves from other plantations who were able-bodied enough to escape to come over to their plantation and help out with the harvest or the planting and work in trade for escaping to the next one in the Underground Railroad. So what this was like a slick little system of slave theft, but they called it slave escape, right? So these people depended on the fugitive system of getting them from plantation to plantation, but as they worked their way north, they would learn the lingo. They would get more skills. They would change skills at different farms and plantations. A lot of the slaves further south, they had this idea that they were highly specialized, but as they moved into the northern farms, they became less and less specialized and more generalized. They got more skills. Eventually, they could make their way to the city, maybe even become literate, maybe bring family members with them, and had a line of communication through this underground, other plantations where they would be able to send back for family members, be able to raise money, be able to pay their way through these things. And depending on which little outfit the little jockey was wearing, or how many of the jockeys were there, they could trade work for clothing and get a horse and get a wagon, and then come back learning how to speak the northern lingo and say, no, I was never a slave, and be able to help family members escape. And this was an underground that took place throughout the mid to late 1800s up until the Civil War. But there was an underground happening for a long time on that, and these people who had nothing would work their way into the north in safety and other levels of economic security. But when they were in that plantation and farm work system, a lot of times all they were doing is working their way up from being slaves to migrant workers. That was it. That was as far as a lot of that went. And then they would become ghetto factory workers in the northern cities. This was not something where everybody just made it to the promised land. Not until after the Civil War and settlement in the West and some of the black townships in Oklahoma and further west in the cowboy thing. A lot of the cowboys were black, and they developed other skills. The key to this was mobility. And the other thing was that a slave that was desirable property in the South was somebody who had more to trade and could go further in this underground network in the North. So they could trade further and go further in the underground network in the North. Likewise, there was an even older European tradition of how serfs and peasants would migrate, and one of the reasons the languages were kept so separate in parts of Europe was to prevent that from happening. In America, the serf system and the slave system didn't last very long compared to other parts of the world because everybody spoke the same language. You could communicate with the people in the different areas. And in Europe, that wasn't possible. In tribal Africa, in the Arab world, they recognize unification of language. That's why in Islam is only, the Quran is only in Arabic. You wouldn't translate the Quran to another language and then not learn Arabic. The idea was universal language would lead to universal values. That's why even the slavery values of the Arab world kind of get around there. As soon as these people learn English and they understand English concepts and things like that, well, that changes. Okay, all of a sudden slavery isn't right. All of a sudden they want to work this little network. They want to work this refugee network. They want to get out of that. And so I'm going to go into the next part of this series because we keep these at under 10 minutes a segment. But realize there was mobility in this system. So I'm going to continue the lecture in the next part because it's not a short thing. Okay, so talked about keeping your looks up. We talked about being able to practice a trade. We talked about being able to communicate. Okay, we talked about understanding culture in the places where you're going to go. Another thing is don't steal from the people. There are try not to be judgmental, but again, you're going to run into people that you're going to figure out that it's probably not going to be a good fit. You got to be diplomatic about that. I know people that have been just hardcore about something. When they saw something they weren't going to agree with. And it depends on what it is. Everybody's got moral standards. Some of us have moral standards that are fairly easy to look up in a book. Others don't. My moral standards are actually relatively easy to look up in a book. My tolerance for other people's moral standards is going to be a little more ambiguous. I'm going to be more tolerant of other cultural moral standards because I've been in jobs where that's necessary. And I understand that in survival situations, certain levels of tolerance are just necessary. Okay. When we talk about physically what the poor man's going to need, luxury items aren't really that unless it's something that makes you look better. And I hate to say it, but the successful people, the wealthier people, they're vain. And a lot of times, it's not that you dress like a millionaire. It's you got to be dressed like you're worth $1 million to the millionaire. Okay, that's kind of what we're looking at. You got to dress like you're worth that $1 million. Not necessarily like you dress like you have the $1 million. Okay, and that's part of how this goes. It's just a reality. When you are trying to work with the people, don't lie to the people. You can present things in a good light in different ways. You can work with somebody who's a little smarter, a little wiser on how to present things in a good light. The thing is, fact checking usually beats lies. And this is very much an issue with stolen valor professionals because it's not just an issue with that person practicing stolen valor. It's going to be an issue with everybody they associated with where that was part of whatever their pitch or sales point was. And it's one of the reasons I've had certain types of interactions with people in the Patriot movement and the survivalist type circles where I've just had to say, listen, man, as long as you are presenting yourself as this, and that, I'm really not going to endorse this situation. If that guy had been more honest about that stuff, I'm sure he could have done better. But they'd chosen to practice stolen valor. When it comes to a lot of things, somebody's going to say anything. There are people that they got their little psychic lie detector thing, or subconsciously they're reading different types of body language. For example, I'm left-handed. So the people that do this body language reading thing over their a little lie detector thing is like a question of, well, if they look up at this corner of their eye or that corner of the eye before making a statement, it means that it's not a true statement. Well, if they're left-handed, then all of a sudden that thing works a little bit differently. So fact-checking doesn't always trump that when people can't check facts. Okay, so on a line with these things, different ways to play it. But if you look good, you're able to bring something to the table. You're being relatively honest about everything. Then you have to have some kind of skills or material that you're capable of getting or acquiring, or that you have a connection for, or something that they value and that they want. So in that question, knowing where resources are, knowing the cost of resources, these types of things. There's plenty of guys that are procurement experts that work wealthier neighborhoods. I could find you this Mercedes for 20% off. If I can find you these items for a better price than you're currently paying, is that something we can work with? That matters, okay? The question of what you would have for your survival if you're the poor man going into this rich neighborhood, you got to have your ticket in and out. You don't want to be the burden on these people and not be able to leave. You also don't want to be the exploited sucker or become a slave who is locked in. So your vehicle is critically important. If you're in areas where the vehicle isn't really the main thing, then you're looking at, whatever your passage is, whatever your plane ticket availability, passport, your ability, a boat, your ability to relocate is important. That a lot of these people are going to have to make their own decisions of whether or not they want you to be a full-time resident or whether you're going to be there for a while. Everybody kind of benefits from everybody, and then you're down the road, okay? And it's not a bad thing down the road. Sometimes it is, but you need to understand that at some point you're down the river or you're down the road, and you want to be able to control your own means of getting there, okay? So as we get into the physical stuff, there's your transportation, okay? That's critically important. Your ability to carry your tools of your trade or your trade with you, that has to be relatively portable. Being familiar with a particular factory thing somewhere where the boss owned everything and you owned nothing, and you really couldn't do that same job anywhere else, that's probably not the job you want, okay? That locked you into serfdom. And as a survivor who, for whatever reason, lost a lot, poor, whatever, you don't want to be locked into that serfdom. The difference is the serfdom is not able to travel. They don't have the language skills. They don't have what it takes. They're going to be stuck where they're at. The slave is bought and sold, but the slave probably can have some opportunities to escape. And what are they looking for? They're looking for the horse, the boat. They're looking to go upriver on the Mississippi. They're looking to jump a train. They're looking to get a hold of a horse and carriage. I mean, they're looking for that means of travel. And so that acquiring that, maintaining that, having access to that means of travel that's yours, that's going to be important, especially in a lot of these situations. If you have a choice between treasures versus getting your car fixed, your bug out vehicle up and running, fuel, this goes into the Mad Max stuff. What is Mad Max questing for in most of these movies? He's questing for his vehicle. He wants repairs, he wants fuel, and then he's going to provide whatever services, and then he's down the road to his next place. He's not wealthy enough to settle. He doesn't have the connections to settle. He doesn't have these things. So you want to look at that means of travel. You want to look at your means of being able to apply your trade. Now with Mad Max, he's kind of like this mercenary guy who had been a cop or had been military. That's going to be a common trade in a lot of shit hit the fan situations, but also realize it's a deadly trade. Okay, it's not something that people who are good at it get old doing. Okay, they're going to get old doing something else. So I would say that you have to look at a peacetime trade that you can carry with you. Okay, this is going to be the toolbox on your truck. That is very critically important. That's going to be more important than some little luxury accommodation on your bug out vehicle. Okay, so luxury accommodations with some of these expedition vehicles are really neat stuff to take inspiration from, but that's not a toolbox for conducting a trade. Okay, so if you got to give up the kegerator and then have a toolbox for conducting the trade, I'm afraid that's what's going to happen. You have to be able to maintain communication into and out of wherever you're at. Now, whether or not you're broadcasting some information that would be inappropriate to broadcast, that's an issue. Okay, that's a very valid issue. But you've got to be able to maintain communication with the outside world and with different things. But understand that different groups, and you're going to have to respect their culture and their security protocols on this. But they're also going to have to respect your personal security and your protocol in that you need to be able to get on your horse, you need to be able to get on your boat or your vehicle, your bug out vehicle, and get to the next stop. So those are the things I'm mainly looking at. And just to go over your personal qualities, keeping your looks up, being able to communicate with people, having skills, the barter situation, being able to provide something that they want. If that's a product of your skills, then that's a good thing. Okay, being able to provide what people want is a little more important to getting in with their situation than it is providing what they need. Because if you argue with what they need, or they haven't told you what they need and it's exactly the same thing as what they want, then okay, then you can work with something. But otherwise, it's a matter of arguing with somebody who's already a pretty successful survivor. So if they're already a successful survivor, and not only are they, if they're wealthy enough to have a big survival retreat and have a lot of attention on that, and even be making a call out, hey, we need people, chances are they're a successful survivor. Chances are they were relatively successful at something before the balloon went up or crap hit the fan or something like that. They were successful at something. They were good at something. So convincing them that some way they already think is different or wrong later in the game, the more that situation is going on and the longer they've survived it, the less they're going to think that they're wrong, and or the less they're going to think that somebody who's poorer and less successful is coming along with any good ideas whatsoever. On the other hand, they also understand that the game is different. They may be examining, okay, here's somebody who's got some really good ideas, but they had enemies, or they had some really bad luck, or whatever else happened. If you're from a city that got nuked, and you were a multimillionaire in that city, and you end up as a refugee somewhere else, but you're from a city that got nuked, and you made a bunch of money, you ran a bunch of businesses, organized a bunch of people, you were out of town when the city got nuked, and you end up, lost everything, and you're a refugee now, but they're gonna say, well, wait a minute, here's a smart guy. Here's a guy who made a bunch of smart decisions. Here's a guy who ended up with a vehicle, weapons, tools, equipment, a few followers by the time he's hitting the road. I'm like, okay, if somebody's kind of got their act together, let's see what's up with this. Yeah, this might be somebody smart. This is somebody who's getting stuff done. This might be worth adding to the program. Okay. So when we're doing this, if you're the survivor, you've got the vehicle, you're able to travel with a trade and trade goods and any of that kind of stuff. The other thing is travel in groups if at all possible. If it's not possible, at least communicate so that even though the group isn't physically traveling, the group is part of the travel plan.